The morning sun had barely risen above the palm trees when Amaka opened her eyes. For a moment, she lay still on the thin mat spread across the hard floor of the tiny storage room she called her bedroom. The room was small, dusty, and hot. Broken baskets, old farming tools, and sacks of dried cassava surrounded her on every side. A rooster crowed outside. Then another. Soon the entire village seemed to wake up. Amaka sighed. Another day had begun. At 21 years old, she had already experienced more suffering than many people did in a lifetime. She slowly pushed herself upright and reached for the wheelchair beside her mat. Her legs had been useless since she was 8 years old. Nobody knew exactly what had caused it. Some said it was a sickness. Others said it was a spiritual attack. Whatever the reason, she had never walked again. The wheelchair she used was old and worn out. One wheel squeaked loudly whenever it moved. Still, it was all she had. As she settled into the chair, she heard a loud bang from the main house. "Amaka!" a sharp voice shouted. Her heart sank immediately. Her aunt was awake. "Amaka, are you still sleeping like a lazy goat?" "I'm coming, Auntie," she replied quickly. She wheeled herself toward the door. The moment she entered the courtyard, Aunt Ngozi folded her arms and glared at her. The woman was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face that always seemed angry. "So this is the time you're waking up?" she snapped. Amaka lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, Auntie. Sorry doesn't cook food." "No, Auntie. Sorry doesn't sweep the compound." "No, Auntie. Sorry doesn't fetch water." Amaka remained silent. She had learned long ago that arguing only made things worse. Ever since her parents died, she had lived with Aunt Ngozi and Uncle Okeke. Instead of treating her like family, they treated her like a burden. To them, she was nothing more than free labor. Every day she cooked, washed dishes, sorted vegetables, cleaned clothes, and performed countless chores. Meanwhile, their daughter, Adiz, spent her days admiring herself in mirrors and gossiping with friends. Adiz was 19 years old and considered herself the most beautiful girl in the village. She never missed an opportunity to remind Amaka how fortunate she was to have functioning legs. As if Amaka needed reminding. "Go and prepare breakfast," Aunt Ngozi ordered. "Yes, Auntie." Amaka wheeled herself toward the kitchen. The kitchen was a small mud structure behind the house. Smoke stains covered the walls. The firewood pile sat in one corner. As usual, she began her work immediately. She cleaned the cooking pots, prepared the fire, boiled water, ground pepper, washed vegetables. Despite her difficult circumstances, Amaka possessed a remarkable gift. She could cook. Everyone who tasted her food agreed it was extraordinary. Even people who disliked her admitted it. Food seemed to come alive in her hands. Simple ingredients became delicious meals. Ordinary soups became unforgettable. Yet nobody praised her for it. Nobody except the occasional villager who happened to taste her cooking. As she stirred the pot of porridge for breakfast, memories of her parents filled her mind. She missed them every day. Her father had been a kind farmer. Her mother had been known throughout the village for her cooking. Amaka often wondered if her talent came from her mother. She remembered sitting beside her as a little girl, watching her stir soups and season stews. Back then life had been happy. Back then she had been loved. Everything changed after the accident that claimed both their lives. She had been only 10 years old. 2 years earlier she had lost the use of her legs. Then she lost her parents. It felt as though fate had taken everything from her. Still, she refused to become bitter. Her mother had always told her something. Never let hardship change your heart. Amaka repeated those words to herself whenever life became unbearable. Breakfast was ready within an hour. She carried the food to the dining area. Uncle Okeke sat waiting. He was a large man with a permanent scowl. Without thanking her, he grabbed a spoon and began eating. Adiz soon joined them. The young woman glanced at the food. "Again?" she complained. Amaka blinked. Again, she had spent over an hour preparing it. But she remained silent. Adiz took one bite. Her expression immediately softened. The food was delicious. Even so, She refused to compliment Amaka. Instead, she rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's okay." Amaka almost smiled. Whenever Adiz called her food okay, it usually meant it was excellent. After everyone finished eating, Amaka cleaned the dishes. Then she washed clothes. Then she sorted vegetables for market. Then she prepared lunch ingredients. By afternoon, her arms ached from pushing herself around all day. But the work never ended. As she peeled yams beneath a mango tree, several children ran past laughing. One little girl stopped. "Good afternoon, Sister Amaka." Amaka smiled warmly. "Good afternoon." The girl stared at her wheelchair. "Do your legs still hurt?" Amaka nodded gently. "A little." The child thought for a moment. "My mother says God answers prayers." "He does." "Then I will pray for you." Amaka's eyes softened. "Thank you." The girl smiled before running away. For several minutes, Amaka sat quietly. Children were often kinder than adults. They saw her disability without seeing her as less valuable. Unfortunately, many grown-ups in the village viewed her differently. Some pitied her. Others mocked her. A few believed she would never amount to anything because she couldn't walk. Only a handful recognized the intelligence, determination, and kindness hidden behind her circumstances. As evening approached, dark clouds gathered overhead. Thunder rumbled in the distance. The rainy season had arrived early. Amaka hurried to finish her chores before the storm began. Soon large drops of rain started falling. The villagers rushed indoors. The compound became quiet. For the first time all day, Amaka found herself alone. She sat beneath the shelter of the kitchen roof and watched the rain. The cool breeze brushed against her face. Moments like these were precious. They allowed her to dream. She imagined owning a restaurant one day. A place where people would travel from far away to eat her food. A place filled with laughter and warmth. A place where she belonged. The dream felt impossible. Yet she held on to it anyway. Dreams were free. Nobody could take them from her. A loud voice interrupted her thoughts. "Amaka!" It was Uncle Okeke. She quickly wheeled herself toward the house. "Yes, Uncle? We have visitors tomorrow." "Okay. You will cook." "Yes, Uncle. And make sure the food is good." Amaka nearly laughed. The food was always good. But she simply nodded. That night she prepared ingredients long after everyone else had gone to bed. By the time she finished, the moon hung high in the sky. Exhausted, she returned to her tiny room. Before sleeping, she knelt as best she could beside her mat. It was something she did every night. She prayed for strength, prayed for guidance, prayed for a better future, and most importantly, prayed for the ability to forgive those who hurt her. "God," she whispered softly, "I don't know why my life is this way. Sometimes I feel forgotten. Sometimes I feel alone." Tears gathered in her eyes. "But thank you for keeping me alive. Thank you for giving me strength every day. Please help me. Please don't forget me." She wiped her tears. Outside, the rain continued falling. Inside, hope still burned quietly in her heart. What Amaka did not know was that her life was about to change forever. Far beyond the village roads, destiny was already moving toward her. A chance encounter, a royal visitor, a journey that would take her from poverty to unimaginable blessings. But for now, she was simply a young orphan in a wheelchair, lying down on a worn mat and preparing for another difficult day. She closed her eyes. The sounds of rain filled the room. Slowly, sleep claimed her. And somewhere beyond the darkness, her miracle waited. The next morning began much like every other morning in Amaka's life. Before the sun rose, she was already awake. The village was still quiet as she pushed herself out of her tiny storage room and into the courtyard. A cool breeze swept through the compound, carrying the scent of wet earth from the previous night's rain. She paused for a moment and looked toward the brightening horizon. The sky glowed with shades of orange and gold. For a brief second, peace filled her heart. Then reality returned. "Amaka!" Her aunt's voice shattered the silence. Amaka sighed quietly. "Yes, Auntie? Where is the firewood?" I stacked it beside the kitchen yesterday. Then why are you standing there? Go and prepare breakfast. Yes, Auntie. She wheeled herself toward the kitchen. The day ahead would be busy. Her uncle had invited important visitors to the house, and Aunt Ngozi had been complaining about preparations since dawn. As Amaka entered the kitchen, she noticed several ingredients arranged on a wooden table: rice, fresh tomatoes, pepper, chicken, onions, spices. For a family that rarely spent money on good ingredients, it was an impressive collection. She immediately understood. Her aunt wanted to impress the guests, and as always, Amaka would be the one doing all the work. She rolled up her sleeves and began. Hours passed. The fire crackled beneath the cooking pots. Steam filled the air. Her hands moved with practiced skill. She chopped vegetables, seasoned meat, prepared stock, measured spices. Every ingredient received her full attention. Cooking was the one thing that brought her genuine happiness. Whenever she cooked, the world seemed to disappear. The insults, the loneliness, the pain, everything faded. By mid-morning, the kitchen was alive with wonderful aromas. Even Aunt Ngozi couldn't stop herself from peeking inside. She stood in the doorway and sniffed the air. For a brief moment, admiration appeared in her eyes. Then it vanished. "Make sure you don't ruin it," she said coldly. Amaka simply nodded. By noon, the food was nearly ready. The visitors had not yet arrived, but Uncle Okeke insisted everything should be prepared beforehand. The largest pot held a rich jollof rice unlike anything most villagers had ever tasted. The grains were perfectly cooked. The spices blended beautifully. The chicken stock added depth and flavor. The aroma drifting from the pot was irresistible. Amaka stirred the rice carefully. A smile appeared on her face. Her mother would have been proud. Suddenly she heard voices outside. Not ordinary voices. These sounded important, excited, urgent. The entire village seemed unusually busy. People were gathering along the road. Children ran past the compound shouting, "A royal convoy is coming. The Queen is visiting. The Queen is here." Amaka froze. The Queen? Why would the Queen visit their small village? Curious, she wheeled herself toward the doorway. Outside, villagers lined both sides of the road. Dust rose into the air as a long procession approached. Royal guards walked ahead. Beautiful vehicles followed behind them. At the center was a luxurious royal carriage specially prepared for the Queen. Everyone bowed respectfully. Women knelt. Men lowered their heads. Children stared with excitement. Amaka watched from the kitchen entrance. She had never seen the Queen in person before. The Queen was known throughout the kingdom for her kindness and wisdom. People often spoke of how deeply she cared for her subjects. As the procession slowly moved through the village, something unexpected happened. The Queen suddenly raised her hand. The convoy stopped. The guards immediately became alert. "What happened?" one asked. The Queen looked around thoughtfully. Then she closed her eyes. She inhaled deeply, again and again. A smile slowly spread across her face. "Do you smell that?" she asked. The guards exchanged confused glances. One sniffed the air. Another did the same. Then they noticed it. A wonderful aroma drifted through the village. Rich, warm, comforting, unlike anything they had smelled all day. "It smells like food, Your Majesty," a guard said. The Queen nodded. "Not just food." She smiled. "It smells extraordinary." The Queen had been struggling with her pregnancy for months. Nothing tasted right anymore. Many meals made her nauseous. Even the finest palace chefs had failed to satisfy her appetite. Yet this aroma awakened a hunger she had not felt in a very long time. "Find out where it's coming from." The guards immediately obeyed. Villagers watched in confusion as several royal guards followed the scent through the streets. The trail led directly toward Uncle Okeke's compound. Moments later they arrived at the kitchen. One guard stepped inside. He stopped abruptly. There sat a young woman in a wheelchair, stirring a pot. The aroma was even stronger inside. The guard blinked. He had expected a famous chef, not a poor village girl. "The queen wishes to see whoever prepared this food," he announced. Amaka nearly dropped her spoon. "The queen?" "Yes." Her heart began racing. She glanced nervously toward the compound. Before she could respond, Aunt Ngozi rushed forward. "My daughter can cook very well," she quickly said. The guard looked around. "Which daughter?" Adiz immediately stepped forward and smiled. "I am her daughter." The guard frowned. "Were you cooking?" Adiz hesitated. Before she could answer, another guard pointed toward Amaka. "The food is beside her." Everyone fell silent. The guards looked at Amaka. Aunt Ngozi's face darkened. Reluctantly, she nodded. "She cooked it." The guards turned back toward the road. "The queen wishes to meet you." Amaka could barely breathe. "Me? The queen wanted to meet her?" For a moment she wondered if she was dreaming. The guards helped wheel her toward the royal convoy. Hundreds of villagers watched. Whispers spread everywhere. "Why does the queen want her? The crippled orphan? What is happening?" Amaka felt every eye in the village upon her. Fear and nervousness churned inside her stomach. Then she saw the queen. The woman looked elegant despite her advanced pregnancy. Her eyes were warm, kind, nothing like the proud rulers Amaka had imagined. The queen smiled immediately when she saw her. "So you're the one who prepared that wonderful meal." Amaka lowered her head respectfully. "Yes, your majesty." "What is your name?" "Amaka." The queen studied her for a moment. There was something gentle and dignified about the young woman despite her worn clothes and obvious poverty. "Amaka, would you allow me to taste your food?" Amaka's eyes widened. "Of course, your majesty." A bowl was quickly prepared. Amaka personally served the queen. The entire village watched. A hush fell over the crowd. The queen lifted the first spoonful. She tasted it, then froze. Her eyes widened. For a second nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then the queen took another spoonful. And another. And another. The guards exchanged surprised glances. The queen had barely eaten anything for weeks. Now she was eating eagerly. A smile spread across her face. "This is incredible." She continued eating. The bowl was empty within minutes. The villagers stared in amazement. The queen laughed happily. "I haven't enjoyed a meal this much since the beginning of my pregnancy." Amaka's eyes filled with tears. No one had ever praised her cooking like that before. The queen looked at her warmly. "Who taught you to cook?" "My mother, your majesty." "Then your mother was truly gifted." Amaka smiled sadly. "She passed away many years ago." The queen's expression softened. "I'm sorry." For a moment neither woman spoke. Then the queen reached for Amaka's hand. "My child, I would like to make you an offer." Amaka's heart skipped a beat. "An offer? What kind of offer, your majesty?" The queen smiled. "I want you to come to the palace." Gasps erupted throughout the crowd. Even the guards looked surprised. The queen continued. "I want you to cook for me during the remainder of my pregnancy." The entire village seemed to stop breathing. Palace invitation. To a crippled orphan. Unheard of. Amaka stared at her in shock. "Your majesty, I don't know what to say." "Say yes." Tears gathered in her eyes. "Yes." The queen laughed happily. "Good." She removed a beautifully decorated invitation from her belongings. "Present this at the palace gates next week." Amaka accepted it with trembling hands. For the first time in years, genuine hope flooded her heart. Maybe her life could change. Maybe God had finally answered her prayers. The queen smiled once more. "I look forward to seeing you." The convoy prepared to leave. As the procession moved away, villagers crowded around Amaka. Some congratulated her. Others stared in disbelief. But across the courtyard, two faces burned with jealousy. Aunt Ngozi and Adiz. Their expressions were dark. Angry. Humiliated. The queen had chosen Amaka, not Adiz, not anyone else. Amaka didn't notice the hatred in their eyes. She was too overwhelmed with joy. Clutching the royal invitation tightly against her chest, she looked toward the sky. A silent prayer escaped her lips. "Thank you, God." For the first time in many years, She allowed herself to believe that something wonderful might finally happen. She had no idea that this invitation would soon spark a chain of events that would change her life forever. Nor did she know that jealousy was already growing inside the hearts of the people she called family. And jealousy, when left unchecked, could become something very dangerous indeed. The excitement from the Queen's visit lingered throughout the village long after the royal convoy disappeared down the dusty road. People gathered in small groups beneath mango trees and outside their compounds, discussing what they had witnessed. Nobody could remember anything like it. The Queen herself had stopped her convoy because of a meal prepared by a poor orphan. Even more shocking was the invitation. The Queen had personally invited Amaka to the palace. It was the kind of opportunity most villagers only dreamed about. But while the rest of the village celebrated, darkness settled inside Aunt Ngozie's heart. The moment the crowd dispersed, she stormed back into the compound. Her face was twisted with anger. Adiz followed close behind. Neither mother nor daughter spoke. The silence itself was frightening. Amaka noticed immediately. She was sitting in the kitchen, staring at the beautiful royal invitation in her hands. The gold seal shimmered in the afternoon sunlight. Every few minutes she touched it to make sure it was real. For the first time in years, she felt hopeful. Perhaps her life was finally changing. Perhaps God had heard her prayers. She smiled softly. That smile disappeared when Aunt Ngozi entered the kitchen. The older woman snatched the invitation from Amaka's hands. "Let me see this." Amaka blinked in surprise. "Auntie, be quiet." The woman carefully examined the invitation. The official royal seal confirmed everything. The invitation was genuine. The Queen truly wanted Amaka. The realization made Aunt Ngozi even angrier. "What does she see in you?" she muttered. Amaka lowered her eyes. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "No, Auntie." "You think you're special now?" "No, Auntie." "You think you're better than Adiz?" Amaka immediately shook her head. "No." But Aunt Ngozi wasn't listening. Jealousy had already clouded her judgment. Adiz folded her arms. "This should have been my opportunity." Amaka looked at her cousin. "I never asked the Queen to choose me." "Of course you didn't," Adiz snapped. "You just wanted everyone to pity you." The accusation hurt. Amaka had spent years enduring insults, but somehow this one felt different. The Queen had chosen her because of her cooking, not because of pity. Yet she remained silent. Arguing would only make matters worse. That evening, Uncle Okeke returned from the village square. The moment he entered the compound, Aunt Ngozi pulled him aside. The conversation began quietly. Then their voices grew louder. Soon they were shouting. Amaka could hear every word from the kitchen. "The entire village is talking about her," Aunt Ngozi complained. "They should be talking about Adiz. They won't stop congratulating that girl. What does she have that our daughter doesn't have?" Uncle Okeke grunted. "Nothing." "Exactly." The couple continued complaining long into the night. Every compliment directed toward Amaka felt like an insult to them. Every villager's praise felt like a personal attack. Instead of being proud of her success, they resented it. Meanwhile, Amaka quietly prepared dinner. She tried to ignore the growing tension. Perhaps they would calm down after a few days. Perhaps once she left for the palace, things would improve. She wanted to believe that. Unfortunately, she was wrong. Later that night, after everyone had gone to bed, Aunt Ngozi and Uncle Okeke remained awake. A small lantern burned inside their room. Adiz sat beside them. The three discussed the situation in hushed voices. "This is unfair," Adiz complained. "I should have been invited." "You can barely boil water," Uncle Okeke said. Adiz glared at him. "That isn't the point." Aunt Ngozi nodded. The Queen only noticed Amaka because she was in the right place at the right time. The family fell silent. Then Uncle Okeke spoke. "What happens if she goes to the palace?" Nobody answered. He continued, "Imagine if the Queen likes her." Aunt Ngozi frowned. "So, what if they keep her there?" Adiz's eyes widened. "What if she becomes rich?" The room grew quiet. For the first time, they considered the possibility seriously. If Amaka gained favor with the royal family, everything could change. She might become important, respected, wealthy, powerful. The thought terrified them. For years they had enjoyed looking down on her. They had treated her like a servant. What if one day she no longer needed them? What if she became more successful than they were? Jealousy slowly transformed into fear, and fear soon became something even uglier. The next morning, the atmosphere inside the compound felt cold, very cold. Nobody spoke kindly to Amaka. Nobody smiled. Even Adiz refused to look at her. Still, Amaka continued working. She prepared breakfast, cleaned the compound, washed dishes, sorted vegetables. The royal invitation remained hidden safely beneath her sleeping mat. Several villagers stopped by during the day. Each one came to congratulate her. "Congratulations, Amaka. We're proud of you. The queen chose the right person." Every compliment deepened Aunt Ngozi's resentment. By evening, her patience had completely disappeared. The breaking point came when an elderly woman visited the compound. The woman smiled warmly at Amaka. "Your mother would be proud." Amaka's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you." The elderly woman nodded. "You have a good heart." Then she turned toward Aunt Ngozi. "You should be proud too. God is blessing the girl." The woman left. Silence followed. Then Aunt Ngozi exploded. "Proud." She slammed a pot onto the ground. "Proud." Everyone jumped. "Why should I be proud?" Amaka stared at her. "Auntie, you have brought nothing but trouble into this house." Amaka blinked. "What did I do?" "What did you do?" The woman laughed bitterly. "Now everyone talks about you." Amaka's heart sank. She suddenly understood. This wasn't about the queen. This wasn't about cooking. This was jealousy. Pure jealousy. Uncle Okeke entered the courtyard. His expression was equally angry. "We've made a decision." Amaka felt nervous. "What decision?" Aunt Ngozi pointed toward the gate. "Leave." The word hung in the air. Amaka stared at her. Surely she had heard wrong. "Auntie, leave this house." The world seemed to stop. Her hands tightened around her wheelchair. "What do you mean?" Uncle Okeke stepped forward. "You heard her. But this is my home." "No." The man's voice was cold. "This has never been your home." The words pierced her heart. For years she had endured their cruelty. Yet hearing those words still hurt. Deeply. She swallowed hard. "Where will I go?" "That's not our problem." "Auntie, please." "No." "Uncle, please." "No." Tears filled her eyes. "I have nowhere else." Adiz looked away. Even she seemed uncomfortable. But neither parent showed any mercy. Within minutes they began throwing her belongings into the yard. Her clothes, her blankets, the few possessions she owned. Everything landed in the dirt. Amaka cried openly now. The villagers gathered outside the compound. Many watched in shock. Some attempted to intervene. "You can't do this. She's family. Have mercy." But Aunt Ngozi refused to listen. "Take her if you care so much." Nobody responded. Most villagers were poor themselves. Helping Amaka would be difficult. Eventually Uncle Okeke wheeled her toward the gate. His grip was rough, heartless. The same man who had promised her parents he would care for her after their deaths. Now he was abandoning her. At the gate he stopped. For a brief moment, Amaka hoped he might change his mind. Instead he pointed down the road. "Go!" Tears streamed down her face. She looked at the house one final time. Memories flooded her mind. Her parents, her childhood, the countless years she had spent there. Despite everything, leaving hurt, very much. Slowly she picked up her small bag. The royal invitation remained safely hidden inside it. Then she turned away. No one stopped her. No one called her back. The gate closed behind her. The sound echoed through the village. Amaka was alone, completely alone. The sun began setting. Orange light stretched across the road. Villagers watched sadly as she wheeled herself away. Some offered prayers. Others wiped tears from their eyes. But nobody could change what had happened. For hours she continued moving. The further she traveled from the village, the lighter she strangely felt. The pain remained. The betrayal remained. Yet something else was beginning to emerge. Freedom. For the first time in years, nobody was shouting at her. Nobody was ordering her around. Nobody was insulting her. The future was uncertain, terrifying, but it was hers. Night eventually fell. Amaka stopped beneath a large tree beside the road. Exhaustion washed over her. Her arms ached. Her stomach growled. Her eyes burned from crying. She looked up at the stars. The same stars her parents had once shown her. Fresh tears filled her eyes. "Mom!" Her voice trembled. "Dad!" The night remained silent. "I don't know what to do." A cool breeze brushed across her face. For some reason, it felt comforting, almost like a gentle embrace. She opened her bag and removed the royal invitation. The golden seal reflected the moonlight. A small smile appeared. The queen wanted her. Someone important believed in her. Someone had seen value in her. Perhaps that meant God still had a plan for her life. She pressed the invitation against her chest. Then she whispered a prayer. "Lord, I have nothing left." Her voice cracked. "No home, no family, no place to go." She closed her eyes. "But if you open this door for me, please show me the next step." The wind rustled through the trees. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called. Amaka looked toward the road ahead. She didn't know it yet, but the path before her would lead far beyond the palace, far beyond the village, far beyond anything she had ever imagined. A new life was waiting, a new city, new friends, new opportunities, and a love story that would one day make the entire kingdom talk. But first, she would have to survive the journey. Alone beneath the stars, Amaka wrapped her thin blanket around herself and prepared for the longest night of her life. The first rays of sunlight crept across the road as Amaka opened her eyes. For a few seconds, she forgot where she was. Then reality returned. The tree, the lonely roadside, the cold night she had spent outside, and the painful truth that she no longer had a home. Amaka sat up slowly in her wheelchair and rubbed her tired eyes. Her body ached. Her shoulders felt stiff from sleeping in an awkward position. Her stomach growled loudly. She hadn't eaten since the previous afternoon. Despite her discomfort, she forced herself to smile. At least she was alive. At least she still had hope. The royal invitation remained tucked safely inside her bag. She pulled it out and stared at the golden seal. The queen's words echoed in her mind. "Come to the palace. I want you to cook for me." Those words gave her strength. For a moment she considered turning around and heading straight for the palace. But another thought stopped her. How would she get there? She had no money, no transportation, no place to stay while she figured things out. The palace was still many miles away. She needed a better plan. After saying a short prayer, Amaka gathered her belongings and continued down the road. The morning air was cool and refreshing. Birds sang from nearby trees. Farmers carrying hoes walked toward their fields. Some glanced curiously at her. A few offered greetings. Most simply continued on their way. By midday, the sun was blazing. Sweat covered her forehead. Her arms burned from pushing the wheelchair for hours. She stopped beneath a tree to rest. As she sat there, an elderly woman carrying a basket of oranges approached. The woman studied her carefully. "My daughter, are you all right?" Amaka smiled politely. "I'm fine, Mama." The woman frowned. "You don't look fine." Amaka hesitated. Something about the woman's kindness reminded her of her mother. Without meaning to, she found herself telling her story. The elderly woman listened quietly. When Amaka finished, tears filled the woman's eyes. "Some people have no conscience," she said. She reached into her basket and handed Amaka several oranges. "Take these." "Mama, I can't pay. I didn't ask for payment." Amaka accepted them gratefully. "Thank you." The woman smiled. "God is watching over you." For the rest of the day, those words stayed with her. God is watching over you. Perhaps he was. Because somehow, despite all the difficulties, strangers kept appearing when she needed help. By evening she reached a small town. The streets were crowded with traders closing their stalls. The smell of roasted corn drifted through the air. Children chased one another between buildings. Amaka searched for a safe place to spend the night. Eventually she found a church. The building was simple but welcoming. Pastor noticed her sitting outside. "Good evening." "Good evening, sir." After hearing her story, he offered her food and allowed her to sleep on a bench inside the church hall. That night, as rain tapped gently against the roof, Amaka felt safer than she had in days. Before sleeping, she whispered a prayer. "Thank you for sending good people into my life." The next morning she resumed her journey. Days passed. Each day brought new challenges. Sometimes the roads were rough. Sometimes the weather was unbearable. Sometimes she became so tired she thought she couldn't continue. Yet she always found the strength to move forward. One afternoon she arrived at a busy motor park. Vehicles came and went constantly. Passengers shouted. Drivers argued. Conductors called out destinations. The noise was overwhelming. Amaka parked her wheelchair beneath a shade and watched. She needed transportation. Continuing entirely by wheelchair would take forever. But transportation required money, and she had none. As she sat there wondering what to do, a bus driver approached. "Where are you going?" "Enugu." The man raised his eyebrows. "That's far." "I know." He studied her for a moment. Then something softened in his expression. "My bus leaves in 30 minutes. Amaka lowered her eyes. "I don't have money." The driver surprised her. "Get in anyway." She stared at him. "What?" "I said get in." Tears immediately filled her eyes. "Thank you." The driver shrugged. "Thank God, not me." For the first time in days, Amaka traveled without pushing herself. The journey felt almost luxurious. As the bus moved along the highway, she stared out the window. Villages gave way to larger towns. The landscape changed. The roads improved. Everything seemed bigger, busier, more modern. Hours later, the city of Enugu finally appeared in the distance. Amaka's breath caught. She had never seen anything like it. Tall buildings stretched toward the sky. Traffic filled the roads. Large signs advertised businesses. Markets bustled with activity. People moved everywhere. The city felt alive, exciting, overwhelming, and frightening. When the bus stopped, the driver helped her unload her wheelchair. "Good luck." "Thank you." Then he drove away. Amaka sat quietly and looked around. She was alone once again. But this time she was in a city of millions. The realization made her nervous. Where would she sleep? What would she eat? How would she survive? For the first time since leaving the village, fear threatened to overwhelm her. The city was so large, so unfamiliar. She suddenly felt very small. Hours passed. The sun began setting. Shadows stretched across the streets. People hurried home. Businesses closed. Amaka remained where she was. She didn't know where else to go. Eventually hunger became unbearable. She reached into her bag. Nothing remained except the royal invitation and a few pieces of clothing. No food, no money, nothing. Her stomach twisted painfully. She closed her eyes. "God, please help me." A tear rolled down her cheek. For the first time since leaving the village, she felt truly hopeless. Just then, a delicious aroma drifted through the air. Cooked rice, stew, fried meat. Her stomach growled loudly. Following the scent, she noticed a roadside food stand nearby. Customers crowded around it. The owner was a middle-aged woman with a warm smile. She moved efficiently between cooking pots and customers. Even from a distance, Amaka could see kindness in her eyes. She tried to look away. Staring at food she couldn't afford would only make things worse. But her hunger was impossible to ignore. Without realizing it, she continued watching. The woman eventually noticed her. Their eyes met. For a moment neither spoke. Then the woman waved. "My daughter, come." Amaka looked behind her. Surely the woman was speaking to someone else. The woman waved again. "You." Amaka slowly approached. The woman studied her carefully. "When last did you eat?" Amaka hesitated. The woman smiled knowingly. That long? Amaka lowered her eyes. The woman immediately filled a plate. Rice, stew, beans, meat. She handed it over. Eat. Amaka's eyes widened. Mama, I can't pay. The woman laughed. Did I ask for payment? Tears filled Amaka's eyes. Not again. Not another stranger showing her kindness. Why were strangers treating her better than her own family? She accepted the plate with trembling hands. The first bite nearly made her cry. The food was delicious. But more than that, it represented something she desperately needed. Compassion. The woman waited patiently until she finished eating. Then she sat beside her. What is your name? Amaka. I'm Mama Grace. Amaka smiled. It's nice to meet you. Mama Grace nodded. You are not from Enugu. No. Where are you from? Amaka explained everything. The village, her parents, her disability, the queen, the invitation, being thrown out, the journey, everything. Mama Grace listened without interrupting. When the story ended, she shook her head sadly. You've suffered. Amaka gave a small smile. A little. A little. Mama Grace laughed softly. My daughter, you've suffered more than many people twice your age. For a moment neither spoke. Then Mama Grace asked a simple question. What will you do now? Amaka stared at the ground. I don't know. The honesty of her answer broke something inside Mama Grace. The older woman thought of her own daughter who had died years earlier. The resemblance wasn't physical. It was something deeper. The same kindness. The same gentle spirit. The same determination. Perhaps that was why she felt such immediate affection for Amaka. Or perhaps it was simply God. Whatever the reason, she made a decision. You can stay with me. Amaka blinked. What? You heard me. Mama, I don't want to be a burden. You won't be. Amaka stared at her. The offer seemed too good to be true. Are you serious? Very serious. Fresh tears appeared in Amaka's eyes. She had spent days wondering where she would sleep. Now a complete stranger was offering her a home. Why? Mama Grace smiled warmly. Sometimes God sends people into our lives for a reason. Amaka could no longer hold back her tears. She began crying openly. Not because she was sad, but because after so much pain, kindness felt almost overwhelming. Mama Grace gently squeezed her hand. Don't cry. Amaka laughed through her tears. I'm trying not to. That evening Mama Grace took her home. The house was modest, small, simple, but to Amaka it looked like a palace. For the first time in years, she entered a home where she felt welcome. That night she slept in a clean room, on a real bed, with a roof over her head. Before closing her eyes, she looked toward the ceiling and smiled. The journey had been difficult, painful, terrifying, but somehow she had survived. And somehow, despite everything, God had provided exactly what she needed. As sleep slowly claimed her, Amaka had no idea that meeting Mama Grace would become one of the most important moments of her life. Because the small roadside food seller was about to open a door that would lead to success, love, royalty, and a future beyond her wildest dreams. For the first time in many years, Amaka slept peacefully. And for the first time in many years, she truly believed that her story was only beginning. For the first time in many years, Amaka woke up without fear. No one was banging on her door. No one was shouting her name. No one was waiting to insult her before sunrise. As she opened her eyes, sunlight streamed through the window of her small room in Mama Grace's house. For a few moments, she simply lay there, enjoying the peace. The bed beneath her was soft. The room was clean. And most importantly, she felt safe. A smile slowly spread across her face. She couldn't remember the last time she had felt this way. Then she heard a cheerful voice from the kitchen. Amaka, breakfast is ready. The sound warmed her heart. Coming, Mama. She wheeled herself out of the room and entered the dining area. Mama Grace was already setting food on the table. Fresh bread, tea, boiled eggs. Nothing extravagant. Yet to Amaka it felt like a feast. You slept well? Mama Grace asked. Very well. Good. Amaka hesitated. Then she said something that surprised even herself. "Thank you." Mama Grace smiled. "For what?" "For everything." The older woman waved dismissively. "Nonsense." "No, Mama. You saved me." Mama Grace's expression softened. "My daughter, sometimes all people need is one person willing to help." Those words stayed with Amaka long after breakfast ended. Later that morning, Mama Grace prepared to leave for her roadside food business. The food stand was located along one of Enugu's busiest roads. Office workers, traders, drivers, and students passed by daily. The stand wasn't large, but it was popular. Mama Grace had built it through years of hard work. "Come with me," she said. Amaka looked surprised. "You want me to help?" "Of course." Within minutes they were on their way. As they approached the food stand, Amaka noticed how busy the area was. Vehicles filled the road. Vendors sold everything from fruits to clothing. The atmosphere was energetic and lively. Several customers immediately greeted Mama Grace. "Mama Grace, good morning. Have you prepared that pepper soup today?" The woman laughed. "Be patient." Amaka watched with admiration. People genuinely liked Mama Grace. That wasn't something she was used to seeing. Back in the village, most people feared her aunt rather than respected her. Here, things were different. As business began, Mama Grace assigned Amaka simple tasks: helping organize ingredients, preparing vegetables, sorting supplies, nothing too demanding. At first, Amaka simply observed. She watched how customers interacted, how orders were handled, how food was served. By afternoon, she already understood the rhythm of the business. Then an opportunity appeared. The next day, Mama Grace arrived looking exhausted. She had barely slept. A supplier had delivered ingredients late, leaving her with little time to prepare. As customers began arriving, she looked overwhelmed. Amaka noticed immediately. "Mama." "Yes." "Would you like me to help with the cooking?" Mama Grace hesitated. The business depended on the quality of the food. What if customers didn't like the changes? Still, she remembered the story about the queen. And she remembered Amaka's confidence. Finally, she nodded. "All right." Amaka smiled. "You won't regret it." The moment she entered the cooking area, something changed. Her movements became focused, confident, natural. Cooking felt as comfortable to her as breathing. She seasoned meat carefully, prepared fresh stock, balanced spices with precision. Every ingredient received attention. Every detail mattered. Mama Grace watched quietly. The young woman wasn't merely cooking. She was creating. The aromas that soon filled the air were unlike anything she had smelled before. Rich, inviting, comforting. Even customers passing by slowed down. Some turned around. Others followed the scent directly to the stand. By lunchtime, the crowd was larger than usual. Much larger. People lined up patiently. Office workers who normally ate elsewhere suddenly appeared. Taxi drivers parked nearby. Market traders crossed the street. Everyone wanted food. Mama Grace blinked in surprise. "What is happening?" Amaka laughed softly. "I don't know." But deep down she knew. The food. The answer was the food. The first customers took their meals. Within minutes, reactions began. A businessman stopped eating and stared at his plate. A student returned for a second serving. Two taxi drivers argued over who had discovered the stand first. One woman approached the counter. "Mama Grace." "Yes." "Who cooked today?" Mama Grace glanced toward Amaka. The woman followed her gaze. "Her?" "Yes." The customer smiled. "Tell her this is the best meal I've eaten in months." Amaka blushed. The compliments continued throughout the day. By evening, every pot was empty. Completely empty. Nothing remained. Mama Grace stared at the empty containers in disbelief. Usually there were leftovers. Today there were none. Customers had bought everything. Every last portion. When they counted the day's earnings, Mama Grace nearly dropped the money. The profit was almost double normal sales. "Amaka." "Yes." The older woman looked at her. "What exactly did you put in that food?" Amaka laughed. The same ingredients. No. Mama Grace shook her head. There is something different. Amaka smiled softly. Maybe I just cooked with love. The answer made Mama Grace laugh. Yet she couldn't deny the results. The following day they repeated the process. Again crowds gathered. Again customers praised the food. Again everything sold out. Then it happened a third time. A fourth. A fifth. Within weeks, word spread throughout the area. People began talking about the food stand with the incredible meals. Office workers brought their friends. Drivers recommended the stand to passengers. Customers traveled from other neighborhoods. The business grew rapidly. Soon, long lines became normal. People sometimes arrived before opening hours. One customer joked that arriving late meant going hungry. Another customer claimed Amaka's jollof rice should be considered a national treasure. The compliments made her smile. But what mattered most wasn't the praise. It was the feeling of purpose. For the first time in her life, people valued her talent. Not out of pity. Not because they felt sorry for her. But because she was genuinely good at something. That realization changed everything. One afternoon, as they prepared food together, Mama Grace spoke quietly. You know, you've transformed this business. Amaka looked up. No, Mama. We transformed it. The older woman smiled. Always humble. Always kind. Those qualities made her love Amaka even more. Weeks turned into months. Business continued improving. Eventually they expanded the stand. A larger cooking area was built. Additional tables were added. More customers could now be served. The extra income improved both their lives. For the first time, Amaka had her own money. The first thing she bought was a new dress. The second was a better wheelchair. The old one had served her faithfully, but it was worn out. The new chair moved smoothly, without squeaking, without wobbling. When she first used it, she nearly cried. Something so simple felt luxurious. One evening, after closing the stand, Mama Grace handed her an envelope. What is this? Open it. Amaka did. Inside was money. A lot of money. Her eyes widened. Mama, you earned it. I can't take this. Yes, you can. It's too much. Mama Grace smiled. No, my daughter. It isn't. Tears filled Amaka's eyes. For years she had worked endlessly for her aunt and uncle without receiving anything. Now someone was rewarding her fairly, treating her with dignity, respecting her contributions. The difference was overwhelming. That night she sat alone in her room staring at the money. Then she opened her bag and removed the royal invitation. She had carried it with her since leaving the village. The gold seal remained intact. For months she had been so focused on survival that she hadn't returned to the palace. Sometimes guilt bothered her. The queen had invited her, yet she never came. Would the queen be angry? Had she forgotten? Amaka didn't know, but somehow she felt that one day she would find out. For now, she carefully returned the invitation to its place. Her future was unfolding in ways she never expected. The orphan who had once been treated like a burden was becoming successful, respected, independent, and every day her confidence grew stronger. One evening, as she and Mama Grace sat outside watching the sunset, the older woman smiled thoughtfully. You know something? What? I think your story is only beginning. Amaka laughed. My story? Yes. She pointed toward the busy road. People come and go every day. Sometimes destiny arrives when you least expect it. Amaka smiled. That sounds mysterious. Mama Grace laughed. Maybe it is. Neither woman realized how true those words would soon become. Because somewhere in Enugu, a wealthy young billionaire was about to encounter an aroma that would change his life forever. An aroma that would remind him of home, of childhood, of his mother, and that aroma would lead him directly to Amaka. The meeting would seem accidental, but in reality, destiny was already moving, piece by piece, moment by moment, preparing two lives to collide. And when that happened, nothing would ever be the same again. The success of Mama Grace's roadside food stand continued to grow. What had once been a simple roadside business had become one of the most talked-about food spots in that part of Enugu. Every morning, customers arrived before opening hours. By lunchtime, queues stretched along the roadside. People came from offices, schools, markets, and neighboring communities. Many claimed they had never tasted food like Amaka's. Others insisted her cooking carried a special touch. Even Mama Grace sometimes joked that God had hidden magic inside Amaka's hands. Amaka always laughed whenever she heard such comments. "There is no magic," she would say. "I simply cook the way my mother taught me." But deep down, she knew cooking was more than just a skill. It was part of who she was. Every meal carried a piece of her heart. Every dish reflected the love and care her mother had shown her years ago. One bright Monday morning, business was especially busy. The weather was beautiful. The sun shone brightly. Traffic flowed steadily along the road. Workers hurried to their offices. Students rushed to classes. The city buzzed with activity. Amaka was standing beside one of the large cooking pots, carefully stirring a rich pot of stew. The aroma drifted into the air. Customers smiled as they inhaled the scent. Some jokingly said they could identify her cooking from miles away. None of them realized how true that statement was about to become. Several kilometers away, a luxurious black Rolls-Royce moved smoothly through the streets of Enugu. Inside sat 32-year-old Chinedu Obi. To most people, Chinedu was known as one of the youngest billionaires in Nigeria. His business empire stretched across several industries: construction, real estate, technology, transportation. His companies employed thousands of people. His wealth appeared regularly in newspapers and magazines. Yet despite all his success, Chinedu felt strangely empty. He stared through the tinted window of the Rolls-Royce as the city passed by. Beside him sat his assistant, Emeka. "Your first meeting starts in 40 minutes, Emeka said. Chinedu nodded absent-mindedly. "Your investors are expecting the final proposal." "All right. You also have a dinner appointment tonight." "Fine." Emeka glanced at him. "You don't sound excited." Chinedu laughed softly. "When was the last time I sounded excited?" His assistant couldn't answer. The truth was that Chinedu had become increasingly withdrawn over the years. Business consumed his life. Money came easily. Success came easily. But happiness seemed harder to find. His relationships rarely lasted. His friendships were few. Even his connection with his parents had grown distant. In particular, he hadn't visited his mother in years. There was no serious reason. Life had simply become busy. Phone calls replaced visits. Messages replaced conversations. Months became years. The realization sometimes bothered him. But he always found excuses. One more meeting. One more project. One more business trip. There was always something demanding his attention. Suddenly, something unusual happened. Chinedu frowned. "What is that smell?" Emeka sniffed the air. "What smell?" Chinedu inhaled deeply. A rich aroma floated through the partially opened window. It was warm, inviting, familiar, very familiar. The scent triggered something deep inside his memory, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. "Stop the car." The driver immediately obeyed. The Rolls-Royce pulled to the side of the road. Emeka looked confused. "Sir, can you smell it now?" His assistant inhaled. This time he noticed it. Food. Delicious food. "What about it?" Chinedu stared through the window. The aroma seemed to pull him toward something. Something important. Without fully understanding why, he opened the door and stepped outside. The scent became stronger. Much stronger. People on the sidewalk immediately recognized him. Several whispered excitedly. Some reached for their phones. But Chinedu barely noticed. His attention remained fixed on the aroma. He followed it. One street, then another, until finally he saw the source. Mama Grace's food stand. The area was crowded. Customers filled every available seat. Others waited patiently in line. The delicious aroma surrounded the entire area. For a moment Chinedu simply stood there. Something about the place felt different. Authentic. Warm. comfortable. It reminded him of simpler times, before wealth, before business, before responsibilities consumed his life. Inside the stand, Amaka was serving customers. She looked up briefly and noticed the expensive Rolls-Royce parked nearby. Then she saw the man standing beside it. Even she recognized him. Everyone in Nigeria knew Chinedu Obi. His face appeared frequently on television and in newspapers. Yet she quickly returned her attention to the customers. To her surprise, Chinedu joined the queue. The sight immediately attracted attention. People whispered. Some stared openly. Others couldn't believe what they were seeing. A billionaire waiting in line at a roadside food stand? It seemed impossible. When his turn finally arrived, Chinedu approached the counter. Mama Grace smiled politely. "Good afternoon. Good afternoon. What would you like?" He glanced toward the food containers. Everything looked delicious. "I'll have whatever smells so good." Mama Grace laughed. "That describes almost everything." For the first time all day, Chinedu smiled. A genuine smile, one he hadn't forced. "Then surprise me." Within minutes, a plate was prepared. Jollof rice, stew, grilled chicken, fried plantains. Simple food. Nothing fancy. Yet the aroma alone was extraordinary. Chinedu paid and found a seat. Then he took his first bite. The effect was immediate. His hand froze halfway to the table. His eyes widened. The sounds around him seemed to disappear. The busy road, the customers, the conversations, everything faded. For one brief moment he was a child again, sitting at the family dining table, laughing with his parents, listening to stories, watching his mother cook. The taste was identical, not similar, identical. His mother's cooking. The memories flooded back with surprising force. Memories he hadn't visited in years. His mother waking up early to prepare breakfast. His mother singing while cooking. His mother smiling as she served meals. His mother reminding him that family mattered more than money. A lump formed in his throat. Slowly he lowered the spoon. Then he took another bite. And another. By the time he finished, his emotions were in complete turmoil. He couldn't remember the last time food had affected him this way. He stood and approached the counter. Mama Grace looked up. "Did you enjoy it?" Instead of answering immediately, he asked a question. "Who cooked this?" Mama Grace smiled. "I thought you might ask." She pointed toward Amaka. "She did." Chinedu followed her gaze. For the first time, he truly noticed the young woman. She sat in a wheelchair, carefully preparing another order. Her movements were confident and efficient. There was a calm dignity about her, a quiet strength. She didn't seem interested in impressing anyone. She simply focused on her work. Something about that intrigued him. He approached. Amaka looked up. Their eyes met. "Hello. Hello. You prepared the food?" "Yes. It was incredible." Amaka smiled politely. "Thank you. It reminded me of someone." "Who?" "My mother." The answer surprised her. She wasn't sure what to say. Fortunately, a customer interrupted. Amaka excused herself and returned to work. Chinedu watched for a moment before leaving. On the drive home, he remained unusually quiet. Even Emeka noticed. "You liked the food?" Chinedu nodded. "Very much. Should I arrange catering for your office?" "No." The answer surprised even him. He didn't want the food delivered. He wanted to return. To the stand. To the atmosphere. To the memories it awakened. That evening, after arriving home, he carried several takeaway containers into his mansion. The house was enormous, beautiful, luxurious, and painfully empty. He sat alone at the dining table, then opened the containers. The aroma immediately filled the room. Again, memories returned. This time they hit even harder. His mother's laughter, his father's stories, family gatherings, the warmth of home. For years he had convinced himself that success required sacrifice. Now he wondered if he had sacrificed too much. Without thinking, he picked up his phone. He stared at his mother's contact information, then hesitated. Finally, he pressed call. The phone rang. Once, twice, then answered. "Chinidu." His mother's voice sounded surprised. He swallowed hard. "Hello, Mom." There was a brief silence. Then warmth filled her voice. "My son." Something inside him shifted. For nearly an hour they talked. Really talked. Not about business. Not about money. About family. About life. When the call finally ended, Chinidu sat quietly. A strange sense of peace settled over him. All because of a meal. All because of a roadside food stand. All because of a young woman named Amaka. The next morning, he found himself thinking about the food again. And about the cook. By lunchtime, he was back in his Rolls-Royce, driving toward the food stand, toward the aroma that had unexpectedly changed something inside him. He told himself he was returning for the food. Nothing more. But deep down, another reason existed. A reason he wasn't ready to admit yet. Because for the first time in a very long time, Chinidu was curious about someone. And that curiosity was about to become the beginning of something neither of them could have imagined. A friendship, a romance, and a love story that destiny had been quietly arranging for years. The next day, shortly before lunchtime, a familiar black Rolls-Royce pulled up beside Mama Grace's food stand. Several customers immediately turned to look. Some whispered excitedly. Others pointed discreetly. The billionaire had returned. Inside the stand, Amaka was busy serving food when she noticed the luxury vehicle through the corner of her eye. She smiled slightly. Something told her he would come back. The previous day, Chinidu had seemed genuinely affected by the food. Now he stepped out of the vehicle dressed simply in a white shirt and dark trousers. Despite his enormous wealth, there was nothing flashy about him. He looked more like an ordinary businessman than one of Nigeria's youngest billionaires. As he approached the stand, Mama Grace grinned. "I knew you'd be back." Chinidu laughed. "Am I that predictable? After the way you ate yesterday?" "Yes." The customers nearby laughed. For the first time in a long while, Chinidu found himself laughing with strangers. It felt surprisingly good. He ordered another meal and sat down. Just like before, the food was exceptional. But this time, he found himself glancing toward Amaka every few minutes. She moved confidently through the crowd, taking orders, serving food, and chatting warmly with customers. People seemed drawn to her. Children especially loved her. Whenever a child approached the stand, Amaka always greeted them with a smile. One little boy accidentally dropped his food. Before his mother could scold him, Amaka quietly prepared another plate free of charge. The child's face lit up with joy. Chinidu noticed and admired it. Many people were kind when life was easy, but Amaka had suffered greatly and still chose kindness. That impressed him more than anything. When business finally slowed down, he approached her. "You seem very popular." Amaka laughed. "I think they're here for the food." "I disagree." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh, people don't smile like that because of food alone." Amaka felt her cheeks warm slightly. She wasn't used to compliments, especially from someone like him. "Thank you." "You're welcome." An awkward silence followed. Then Chinidu surprised himself. "Can I sit?" She gestured toward an empty chair nearby. "Of course." For the next 30 minutes, they talked. At first, the conversation was simple. Favorite foods, life in Enugu, business, the weather. But gradually it became more personal. Chinidu discovered that Amaka was intelligent, thoughtful, and funny. Far funnier than he expected. Several times she made him laugh unexpectedly. One story about a stubborn goat from her village nearly made him choke on his drink. "You named a goat? It wasn't my idea." "It sounds like your idea." She grinned. "Maybe a little." For the first time in years, Chinidu found himself enjoying a conversation without checking his phone, without worrying about work, without thinking about business. The realization surprised him. Eventually his assistant called. A meeting awaited. Reluctantly, he stood. "I have to go." Amaka nodded. "Business never sleeps." He smiled. "Unfortunately." Then, after a brief hesitation, he asked, "Can I come back tomorrow?" Amaka blinked. "You don't need permission." "Good." He smiled. Because I'm coming back anyway. As the Rolls-Royce disappeared down the road, Mama Grace appeared beside Amaka. A knowing smile spread across her face. What? Mama Grace laughed. Nothing. Mama, I'm just observing. Amaka shook her head. There is nothing to observe. The older woman laughed even harder. If you say so. The following day Chinedu returned. And the day after that. Then the day after that. Soon his visits became a regular part of the week. At first people assumed he simply loved the food. But eventually, everyone noticed the truth. He always stayed longer than necessary. Much longer. Even after finishing his meal, he would remain behind talking with Amaka. Sometimes for an hour. Sometimes longer. The friendship developed naturally. Neither forced it. Neither planned it. It simply happened. One afternoon, heavy rain suddenly began falling. Customers rushed for shelter. The road emptied. Business slowed to a halt. Chinedu happened to be visiting when the storm arrived. He and Amaka sat beneath the shelter watching the rain. For several minutes, neither spoke. The sound of raindrops filled the silence. Finally Chinedu asked a question. What happened to your legs? The moment the words left his mouth, he regretted them. Most people asked out of curiosity rather than concern. He didn't want to sound like them, but Amaka surprised him. She wasn't offended. Instead, she looked toward the rain. I got sick when I was 8. What kind of sickness? The doctors never knew for sure. She smiled sadly. When I recovered, I couldn't walk anymore. Chinedu remained silent. She continued. At first I kept waiting for things to go back to normal. And they never did. The honesty in her voice touched him. Many people hid their pain. Amaka didn't. She acknowledged it without letting it define her. Was it difficult? Amaka laughed softly. That's one way to describe it. For the next hour, she shared parts of her story. Not all of it. Just enough. She told him about losing her parents. About life with her aunt and uncle. About being thrown out. About arriving in Enugu with nothing. Chinedu listened quietly. By the time she finished, his chest felt tight. The cruelty she had endured made him angry. Yet somehow she remained gentle. Optimistic. Kind. How? Most people would have become bitter. Not Amaka. You're stronger than you realize, he said quietly. She shook her head. No. You are. I'm just surviving. No. His voice grew firmer. You survived things that would have broken many people. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Amaka smiled. A genuine smile. One that reached her eyes. Thank you. Something shifted inside Chinedu. A feeling he couldn't quite explain. The more time he spent with her, the more he admired her. Weeks passed. The friendship continued deepening. Soon Chinedu began helping around the food stand whenever business became busy. The sight shocked customers. A billionaire carrying food trays, cleaning tables, serving drinks. People often stared in disbelief. One afternoon a customer asked him directly, Sir, why are you doing this? Chinedu glanced toward Amaka, then smiled. Because they needed help. The answer seemed simple, but Amaka noticed something deeper. Despite his wealth, Chinedu wasn't arrogant. He treated everyone with respect. Drivers, vendors, customers, children. No one was beneath him. That quality made her trust him. One evening, after closing the stand, Chinedu invited both Amaka and Mama Grace to dinner. Mama Grace immediately declined. I'm old. You are not old. I am. No, I am. They argued playfully for several minutes. Eventually Mama Grace smiled. You two go. Amaka nearly choked. Mama! What? The older woman pretended innocence. It's just dinner. Chinedu struggled not to laugh. Amaka glared at both of them. The dinner turned out to be wonderful. They talked for hours, shared stories, laughed constantly. By the end of the evening, neither wanted it to end. As Chinedu drove her home, silence settled inside the vehicle. Not uncomfortable silence. Comfortable silence. The kind shared between people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. Finally, Amaka spoke. Can I ask you something? Anything. Why do you keep coming back? The question caught him off guard. For several seconds, he searched for an answer. Then he told the truth. Because you're easy to talk to. Amaka smiled. That's your answer? It's part of it. What about the other part? He glanced at her, then looked back at the road. The other part is that I like being around you. Her heart skipped unexpectedly. Neither spoke again for the rest of the drive. That night, lying in bed, Amaka found herself thinking about him. His kindness, his patience, his smile, the way he listened when she spoke, the way he treated her like a person instead of a disability. For years she had convinced herself that romance wasn't meant for someone like her. People saw the wheelchair first, everything else second. But Chinedu seemed different. He saw her, the real her. The thought both excited and frightened her. Across the city, Chinedu lay awake thinking about her too. The realization finally became impossible to ignore. He looked forward to seeing her. He thought about her constantly. He smiled whenever her name appeared on his phone. He cared about her happiness. Her opinions mattered to him. Her laughter brightened his day. The truth was becoming obvious. He was falling in love. Slowly, deeply, and completely. He wasn't ready to admit it aloud. Not yet, but his heart already knew. Meanwhile, destiny continued moving quietly in the background, drawing them closer together, preparing them for revelations neither could imagine. Because neither Amaka nor Chinedu yet knew how deeply their lives were already connected. A connection stretching all the way back to a village, a queen, a forgotten invitation, and a royal family searching desperately for a young woman named Amaka. A search that would soon bring shocking truths into the light and change everything forever. The friendship between Amaka and Chinedu continued to grow stronger with each passing day. What had started as simple conversations over plates of food had become something much deeper. They spoke almost every day. When Chinedu wasn't visiting the food stand, he called. When he was traveling for business, he sent messages. When Amaka had a difficult day, somehow he always seemed to know exactly what to say. For the first time in many years, Amaka felt truly seen. Not pitied, not tolerated. Seen. Chinedu never treated her differently because of her wheelchair. He never spoke to her with sympathy in his voice. He never acted as though she was fragile. Instead, he treated her like an equal, and that meant more to her than he could ever understand. One Saturday afternoon, Chinedu arrived at the food stand with an unusual smile on his face. Amaka immediately noticed. You look suspicious. He laughed. Suspicious? Yes. What makes you say that? You only smile like that when you're planning something. Chinedu placed a hand over his chest dramatically. I'm offended. You should be. He shook his head. Get ready. For what? We're going somewhere. Amaka looked confused. Where? It's a surprise. I don't like surprises. That's a lie. Amaka laughed. Unfortunately for her, Chinedu was right. She did like surprises. A few hours later, they arrived at one of the most beautiful parks in Enugu. The park overlooked rolling hills and beautiful gardens. Children played nearby. Families enjoyed picnics. Couples walked along winding pathways. The atmosphere felt peaceful, almost magical. As Chinedu pushed her wheelchair along one of the pathways, Amaka looked around in amazement. It's beautiful. I thought you'd like it. I do. For several minutes, they simply enjoyed the scenery. Neither felt pressured to speak. Sometimes the most comfortable relationships were the ones that didn't require constant conversation. Eventually, they found a quiet spot overlooking the city. The view stretched for miles. Buildings sparkled beneath the afternoon sun. Roads wound through the landscape. Life moved endlessly below. Amaka smiled. I've never seen Enugu like this. Chinedu sat beside her. It's one of my favorite places. I can see why. The wind gently brushed across their faces. For a while, neither spoke. Then Chinedu asked a question. If you could change one thing about your life, what would it be? The question surprised her. She thought carefully. Many people would assume her answer would involve her legs. But after a moment, she shook her head. I wouldn't change anything. Chinidu blinked. Nothing. Nothing. Not even. He glanced toward her wheelchair. Amaka smiled. Not even that. Why? She looked toward the city. Because every difficult thing I experienced brought me here. His heart tightened. If your parents hadn't died, I wouldn't have learned resilience. If your aunt and uncle hadn't treated you badly, I might never have left the village. If you hadn't come to Enugu, she smiled softly, I wouldn't have met Mama Grace. Then she glanced at him. And I wouldn't have met you. For a moment, neither spoke. Something passed between them. Something powerful. Something impossible to ignore. Chinidu looked away first. Not because he wanted to, because he suddenly found it difficult to breathe. Later that evening, they visited a restaurant. The waiter immediately recognized Chinidu. Within minutes, whispers spread throughout the room. Several people stared openly. A few even approached for photographs. Amaka watched quietly. This was one part of his life she still struggled to understand. The attention, the fame, the constant public interest. When the interruptions finally ended, Chinidu sighed. Sorry. For what? That. She smiled. You didn't ask to be famous. No. He rubbed his forehead. Sometimes it gets exhausting. Amaka studied him. Most people envied his life. The wealth, the success, the luxury. Yet sitting across from him now, she realized something important. Money solved many problems, but not every problem. Chinidu often seemed lonely. The realization made her heart ache. Over the following weeks, their outings became more frequent. They visited art galleries, museums, gardens, bookstores, restaurants. Sometimes they did nothing more than drive around the city talking. Those simple moments often became her favorites. One evening, while driving through Enugu, they became stuck in traffic. Neither seemed bothered. The conversation flowed easily. Eventually, the topic shifted to relationships. Chinidu immediately regretted it. The subject felt dangerous, too personal, too revealing. But it was already too late. Were you ever engaged? Amaka asked. He shook his head. No. Never. No. She looked surprised. A man like you? He laughed. What does that mean? You know exactly what it means. No, I don't. You're rich. True. Successful. Also true. Women probably throw themselves at you. Chinidu nearly choked. Amaka burst out laughing. That's not funny. It's a little funny. He shook his head. Money attracts attention, but not necessarily love. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. For a moment, she saw genuine sadness there. Did someone hurt you? He hesitated, then nodded. More than once. Amaka remained silent. Eventually he continued. Most people saw the money before they saw me. Her heart softened, because in many ways she understood exactly what he meant. People often saw the wheelchair before they saw her. They both knew what it felt like to be misunderstood, to be reduced to one aspect of their lives. You deserve better. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Chinidu looked at her, really looked at her. The traffic around them seemed to disappear. You think so? I know so. Something shifted inside him. A feeling he had been fighting for weeks, perhaps months. The feeling was becoming impossible to ignore. Meanwhile, not everyone approved of their growing relationship. As word spread throughout Enugu, criticism followed. Some people questioned Chinidu's intentions. Others questioned Amaka's. One afternoon, Amaka overheard two women talking near the food stand. He's probably just feeling sorry for her. The word stung. Maybe. He'll lose interest eventually. Amaka pretended not to hear, but the comments followed her throughout the day. That evening, she sat alone in her room thinking about them. What if they were right? What if this was temporary? What if she was allowing herself to hope for something impossible? A knock interrupted her thoughts. Moments later, Mama Grace entered. The older woman immediately sensed something was wrong. What happened? Nothing. Mama Grace raised an eyebrow. Try again. Amaka smiled weakly. Eventually she explained. Mama Grace listened quietly. Then she laughed. Amaka blinked. Why are you laughing? Because people always talk. Mama. No. The older woman sat beside her. Listen to me. Amaka remained silent. You spent years surviving people who told you that you would never matter. Mama Grace took her hand. Were they right? No. You survived people who said you would never succeed. Were they right? No. You survived people who said nobody would ever care about you. Tears gathered in Amaka's eyes. Were they right? No. Mama Grace smiled. Then why start believing them now? The words hit her hard. Very hard. Because they were true. For years she had overcome impossible odds. Why let strangers define her future now? The next day, Chinedu noticed she seemed quieter than usual. After some gentle questioning, she eventually told him about the comments. His reaction surprised her. He became angry, not at her, at the people who made the comments. They don't know you. I know. They don't know us. I know. Then why do you care what they think? She laughed. That's exactly what Mama Grace said. She's smart. Very. He nodded. Then his expression became serious. Amaka. Yes. I need you to understand something. His voice carried an intensity she had never heard before. I don't spend time with you because I pity you. Her heart skipped. I know. No. He shook his head. I need you to really hear this. The world seemed to pause. Everything narrowed to that moment. I spend time with you because you're intelligent. His eyes never left hers. You're kind. His voice softened. You're brave. A lump formed in her throat. And you're one of the most incredible people I've ever met. Tears filled her eyes. For a moment, neither moved. Neither spoke. The truth hung between them. Powerful. Undeniable. And beautiful. That night, neither slept much. Both lay awake thinking about the conversation. About the feelings they could no longer ignore. About the possibility that what existed between them was becoming something far greater than friendship. Because deep down they both knew the truth. Their hearts were already moving in the same direction. Toward love. A love that would soon be tested. A love that would reveal long-buried secrets. And a love that would eventually lead them back to the very village where Amaka's journey had begun. Neither of them knew it yet, but destiny was preparing its biggest surprise. And the moment of revelation was drawing closer with every passing day. 3 months after the conversation that changed everything, life felt different for Amaka. Happier, brighter, full of possibilities she had never dared imagine. The friendship between her and Chinedu had blossomed into something deeper. Neither of them had officially spoken the words yet, but everyone around them already knew. Mama Grace knew. The workers at the food stand knew. Even regular customers knew. The way Chinedu looked at Amaka said everything. And the way Amaka smiled whenever his Rolls-Royce appeared was equally revealing. One evening, after closing the food stand, Chinedu arrived carrying a bouquet of flowers. Amaka immediately laughed. What did you do? He blinked. What makes you think I did something? Because men only bring flowers when they're apologizing or planning something. Chinedu laughed loudly. You really don't make this easy. She folded her arms dramatically. I'm waiting. For a moment he simply stared at her. Then his expression softened. Amaka. Something in his voice caused her heart to beat faster. Yes. There is something important I want to ask you. The atmosphere suddenly changed. Even Mama Grace, who had been pretending not to listen, quietly disappeared into the house. Amaka swallowed nervously. What is it? Chinedu took a deep breath. Over the years he had negotiated Billionaire deals, addressed conferences, spoken before powerful investors. Yet somehow this felt far more frightening. I love you. The words hung in the air. Simple, honest, powerful. Amaka froze. For several seconds she couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Tears immediately filled her eyes, because deep down she had hoped, prayed, dreamed, But part of her never believed this moment would actually happen. Chinedu continued. I've tried to fight it. He laughed softly. Actually, that's a lie. I stopped fighting it a long time ago. A tear rolled down Amaka's cheek. He gently wiped it away. I love your kindness. Another tear followed. I love your strength. His voice grew softer. I love your heart. By now she was openly crying. Not from sadness. From overwhelming happiness. For years she had believed no man could ever truly love her. Not with her disability. Not with her painful past. Not with everything she had been through. Yet here stood Chinedu, choosing her, loving her, seeing her. Say something, he whispered. Amaka laughed through her tears. I love you too. Relief flooded his face instantly. The smile that followed was brighter than anything she had ever seen. For a long moment, neither spoke. They simply stared at each other, both realizing their lives had changed forever. Several weeks later, Chinedu arrived at the food stand looking unusually serious. Amaka noticed immediately. What's wrong? Nothing. You're lying. He sighed. She knew him too well. There is something we need to discuss. Her stomach tightened. The serious tone worried her. Okay. He pulled out a chair and sat beside her. Then he reached for her hand. I want you to meet my parents. For a moment she simply stared at him. Then relief washed over her. That wasn't bad news at all. You scared me. He laughed. Sorry. I thought something terrible had happened. Nothing terrible. He smiled. I just want the most important people in my life to meet each other. Her cheeks warmed. The most important people in my life. The words touched her deeply. Still, nervousness quickly replaced relief. Meeting his parents felt significant. Very significant. What if they don't like me? They will. You don't know that. I do. She shook her head. Chinedu. Amaka. She laughed despite herself. You're impossible. So I've been told. Several days later, preparations began. Mama Grace insisted on helping. The older woman spent hours selecting clothes, offering advice, making suggestions. At one point, she became so excited that Amaka started laughing. Mama. What? I think you're more nervous than I am. I am. The answer came so quickly that both women burst into laughter. The day of the trip finally arrived. A sleek black Rolls-Royce stopped outside the house. The driver opened the door. Chinedu stepped out smiling. You look beautiful. Amaka's cheeks immediately turned red. She wore a simple but elegant dress. Nothing flashy. Nothing extravagant. Yet somehow she looked radiant. Thank you. Mama Grace hugged her tightly. Then she whispered something in her ear. Trust your heart. Amaka smiled. I will. The journey began shortly afterward. As the Rolls-Royce moved along the highway, Amaka gazed out the window. The scenery gradually changed. Urban buildings gave way to smaller towns. Then villages. Then long stretches of countryside. At first she didn't think much about it. But after several hours, something began feeling familiar. Very familiar. She frowned. I know this road. Chinedu glanced at her. You do. I think so. The further they traveled, the stronger the feeling became. She recognized landmarks, road signs, certain buildings. Her confusion grew. Why did everything seem so familiar? Then her eyes widened. Her heart skipped. No. Chinedu looked concerned. What is it? Amaka stared through the window. No. The road ahead led directly toward her village. The same village she had left behind. The same village where her aunt and uncle still lived. The same village she never expected to see again. Fear and confusion collided inside her. Chinedu. Yes. Why are we going here? He smiled. Because my parents live here. The answer made no sense. None whatsoever. His parents lived in her village? How? Why? Questions flooded her mind. Before she could ask any of them, the convoy continued forward. The village finally appeared. Much of it looked exactly as she remembered. The familiar roads, the market, the church, the old trees. Memories rushed back instantly. Painful memories, beautiful memories, childhood memories, everything at once. Villagers stared as the Rolls-Royce passed. Many pointed excitedly. Others whispered. Luxury vehicles rarely visited. Eventually the convoy approached the largest structure in the area. A magnificent palace. Amaka froze. Her mouth slowly fell open. The palace. The royal palace. Suddenly pieces began connecting inside her mind. The queen. The invitation. The village. The unanswered questions. Her pulse quickened. Surely not. Surely it couldn't be. The vehicle stopped. Servants rushed forward. Guards lined the entrance. Everything felt unreal. Then Chinedu stepped out. He walked around the vehicle and helped her. Ready. Amaka could barely speak. Chinedu. He smiled. Come. Together they entered the palace. The grand halls stretched before them. Elegant decorations filled every room. Servants moved efficiently through the corridors. Amaka's heart pounded louder with every passing second. Then she saw her. The queen. The same queen who had tasted her food all those months ago. The same queen who had invited her to the palace. The same queen she had never managed to visit. For one stunned moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The queen stared. Her eyes widened. Then tears immediately filled them. Amaka! The young woman froze. The queen rushed forward. Without hesitation, she embraced her tightly. My child! Amaka could barely process what was happening. The queen was crying. Actually crying. I searched everywhere for you. The words shocked her. Everywhere? The queen pulled back slightly and held her face. I thought something terrible had happened. Amaka stared in disbelief. You searched for me? For months. The queen's voice trembled. I sent people to your village. Fresh tears appeared in the queen's eyes. I asked everyone. Amaka felt overwhelmed. The queen had remembered her. After all this time, the queen had cared enough to search. Meanwhile, Chinedu watched quietly. A smile slowly spread across his face. Everything finally made sense. The queen turned toward him. My son. My son. The words echoed inside Amaka's mind. My son. Slowly she turned toward Chinedu. The realization hit her like lightning. The queen's son. The queen's son. The queen's son. Her eyes widened, then widened even more. Wait. Chinedu laughed softly. I was wondering when you'd figure it out. Amaka pointed at him. Then at the queen. Then back at him. You? Me? The queen laughed through her tears. Yes. Amaka stared, completely speechless. The billionaire, the man she loved, the man she planned to marry, wasn't just a billionaire. He was a prince, an actual prince. The prince of her community, the prince of the kingdom, the prince she had unknowingly fallen in love with. Her emotions became impossible to describe. Shock, disbelief, confusion, happiness. Everything collided at once. You never told me. Chinedu smiled sheepishly. I was waiting for the right time. There was a right time? Apparently not. The queen laughed loudly. Soon everyone else joined in. For the first time in years, the palace felt filled with joy. Yet neither Amaka nor the royal family realized that even bigger revelations were still coming. Because the queen's search for Amaka had uncovered disturbing questions. Questions about why she never arrived at the palace. Questions about what really happened after the invitation. Questions that would soon expose the truth about her aunt and uncle. And when that truth came into the open, the entire village would be forced to confront the cruelty they had hidden for so long. But for now, Amaka sat inside the palace in complete disbelief. The orphan who had once slept on a mat in a storage room had unknowingly fallen in love with a prince. And her life was about to change forever. Amaka barely slept that night. The palace guest room she occupied was larger than the entire house she had once shared with her aunt and uncle. The bed was soft. The room was elegant. The balcony overlooked beautiful palace gardens. Yet none of those things occupied her thoughts. Instead, her mind replayed the same shocking revelation over and over again. Chinedu was a prince, an actual prince. She laughed softly to herself as she stared at the ceiling. If someone had told her a year ago that she would one day fall in love with a billionaire prince, she would have thought they were joking. Life had a strange way of surprising people. A knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened. Queen Kem stepped inside. The queen smiled warmly. "Good morning, my child." Amaka immediately smiled. Something about the queen felt familiar, comforting, motherly, the same warmth she imagined her own mother would have shown if she were still alive. "Good morning, Your Majesty." The queen sat beside her. "You can call me mother if you want." Amaka blinked. "Mother?" The queen laughed. "You plan on marrying my son, don't you?" Amaka's cheeks turned red instantly. The queen laughed even harder. "I'll take that as a yes." For a while they talked about simple things. The palace, Enugu, cooking, Chinedu's childhood. Every minute made Amaka feel more comfortable. Then the queen's expression gradually became serious. "There is something I've wanted to ask you." Amaka noticed the change immediately. "What is it?" The queen sighed. "What happened after I invited you to the palace?" Silence filled the room. The question had been coming. Amaka knew it. Still, she felt nervous. The queen continued. "I searched for you." Her voice carried genuine sadness. "When you didn't arrive, I assumed something delayed you." She shook her head. Then weeks passed. The queen looked away briefly. "I became worried." Amaka listened quietly. "I sent guards to your village." The queen's eyes narrowed slightly. "And what they told me never made sense." "What did they say?" The queen sighed. "They claimed you disappeared." Amaka stared. The queen nodded. "They said nobody knew where you went." For several seconds, Amaka remained silent. Then she slowly lowered her eyes. The queen immediately noticed. "My child." Amaka took a deep breath. The time had come. She could no longer hide the truth. "That wasn't what happened." The queen's expression hardened. "I suspected as much." Amaka nodded. Then she began telling her story. Everything. The jealousy, the insults, the arguments, being thrown out, sleeping by the roadside, traveling to Enugu, meeting Mama Grace, the food stand, every detail. The queen listened in complete silence. As the story continued, her face darkened, not with anger toward Amaka, with anger toward those who had hurt her. When Amaka finally described the moment her aunt and uncle threw her out of the house, tears filled the queen's eyes. "They did that to you?" Amaka nodded. The queen clenched her hands. "After everything you had already suffered?" Another nod. The room fell silent. The queen looked away briefly. When she spoke again, her voice trembled. "I am so sorry." Amaka blinked. "Your Majesty, none of this was your fault." "I know." The queen shook her head. "But I should have found you sooner." Amaka reached for her hand. The gesture surprised both of them. "You found me now." The queen smiled sadly. "Yes." Then she squeezed Amaka's hand. "And I promise nobody will ever treat you that way again." At that moment, a knock sounded at the door. King Obiora entered. The king was a tall, distinguished man with a commanding presence. Despite his status, there was kindness in his eyes. The moment he entered, he noticed the serious atmosphere. "What happened?" The queen stood. "She told me everything." The king frowned. "Everything?" The queen nodded. Minutes later, Amaka repeated her story. The king listened carefully. As she spoke, his expression became increasingly grim. By the time she finished, the room felt heavy with emotion. The king remained silent for several moments. Then he spoke. "Your parents were good people." Amaka looked surprised. "You knew them?" The king nodded. "Very well." Fresh tears filled her eyes. The king continued. "When they died, we trusted your uncle to care for you." His voice hardened. "It appears that trust was misplaced." The queen crossed her arms. "Very misplaced." For a while nobody spoke. Then Chinedu entered the room. He immediately sensed the tension. "What happened?" The queen looked at him. "She told us the truth." His smile disappeared instantly. "What truth?" The queen explained. As she spoke, Chinedu's expression changed. Shock, disbelief, anger. By the end of the story, his jaw was clenched. They threw her out? Nobody answered. The silence itself was answer enough. For several seconds, he simply stared at the floor. Then he looked at Amaka. The pain in his eyes surprised her. He seemed more upset than she was. "I'm sorry." Amaka shook her head. "You didn't do anything. I know." His voice was quiet. "But you deserved better." The king suddenly stood. His decision was immediate, firm, unquestionable. "We are going to the village." Everyone looked at him. The queen raised an eyebrow. "Today. Today." The king's voice carried the authority of a ruler. "I want answers." Chinedu nodded immediately. "So do I." The queen agreed. For months she had wondered what happened. Now she finally knew. And she wasn't willing to let the matter rest. Preparations began at once. Meanwhile, news spread throughout the palace. Servants whispered excitedly. Guards exchanged curious glances. Everyone wanted to know more about the young woman who had captured the prince's heart. The more people learned about Amaka, the more they admired her. Many expected a future princess to come from wealth and privilege. Instead, Chinedu had chosen a woman known for kindness and resilience. The palace staff respected that. Later that afternoon, Amaka found herself walking through the palace gardens with Chinedu. The air was cool. Birds sang among the trees. Yet her thoughts remained troubled. What if this causes problems? Chinedu looked at her. "What do you mean?" "The village." He understood immediately. "You don't have to worry. I don't want revenge." His expression softened. "I know. I don't want anyone hurt." Chinedu smiled. "That's because you're you." She laughed softly. "What does that mean?" "It means your heart is too good." For a moment they walked in silence. Then Chinedu stopped. He gently turned toward her. "Amaka." "Yes. You know something?" "What?" "If I had gone to that food stand 100 times." She smiled. "You did go many times." He laughed. "Let me finish." "Fine. If I had gone there 100 times, I would still choose you." Her heart skipped. Every single time. Tears gathered in her eyes. Not because the words were grand. Because they were sincere. That sincerity was what she loved most about him. Meanwhile, several miles away, life continued normally in the village. Aunt Ngozi sat outside her house sorting vegetables. Uncle Okeke chatted with a neighbor. Adiz complained about yet another failed relationship. None of them knew what was coming. None of them knew that the truth had finally reached the palace. None of them knew that the king and queen had learned everything. For months they had believed the matter was finished. Forgotten. Buried. They were wrong. Very wrong. Back at the palace, the king assembled several trusted guards. The queen reviewed travel arrangements. The royal convoy prepared for departure. Everything moved quickly, purposefully, because the royal family had made a decision. The truth would come into the light, not out of revenge, out of justice, and because Amaka deserved better, far better. That evening, the royal family gathered for dinner. For the first time in years, laughter filled the royal dining hall. The queen shared stories about Chinedu's childhood. The king revealed embarrassing memories. Chinedu repeatedly begged them to stop. The result only encouraged them. Amaka laughed harder than she had in months. Watching her laugh, the queen smiled. Then she glanced toward her husband. The king smiled back. Neither needed to speak. Both were thinking the same thing. This young woman belonged in their family. Not because she would marry their son. Not because of her cooking. Not because of fate. Because of who she was. Kind, strong, forgiving. Everything they had hoped their future daughter-in-law would be. As dinner ended, the queen hugged Amaka. Then she whispered softly, "No matter what happens tomorrow, remember one thing." "What?" The queen smiled. "You are no longer alone." Tears immediately filled Amaka's eyes. For most of her life, loneliness had been her constant companion. Now, for the first time, she truly believed those days were over. Tomorrow would bring answers. Tomorrow would bring justice. Tomorrow would bring confrontation. But tonight, she sat surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her. And that realization felt more precious than any palace, any wealth, or any title. Because after years of being unwanted, Amaka had finally found something she thought she had lost forever: family. The morning sun had barely risen when the royal convoy departed from the palace. Several luxurious Rolls-Royces led the procession. Behind them came additional vehicles carrying palace guards, royal advisors, and attendants. The convoy stretched across the road like a moving river of wealth and power. Inside the first Rolls-Royce sat King Obiora, Queen Kem, Prince Chinedu, and Amaka. As the vehicle moved toward the village, Amaka stared quietly through the window. Her emotions were complicated. Part of her felt nervous. Another part felt sad. And deep down, she felt something she couldn't quite explain: closure. For years, the wounds left by her aunt and uncle had remained open. Today, those wounds would finally be confronted. The queen gently placed a hand over hers. "Are you all right?" Amaka nodded. "I think so." The queen smiled. "You don't have to be afraid." "I'm not afraid." The answer surprised even her, because it was true. For the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of her aunt and uncle. She wasn't the frightened orphan they once controlled. She wasn't the helpless girl they constantly insulted. She had survived. She had grown. And she had discovered her own worth. The convoy continued moving. Several hours later, they reached the village. The first vehicle rolled onto the familiar dirt road. Immediately, villagers noticed. Children abandoned their games. Women stopped their conversations. Farmers paused their work. Nobody could remember ever seeing so many luxury vehicles in the village at once. Excited whispers spread rapidly. "The king is here. The queen. The prince has returned. Look at all those cars." Within minutes, people flooded toward the village center. The entire community seemed to come alive. Meanwhile, inside their compound, Aunt Ngozi was sweeping the yard. She heard the commotion but paid little attention. Royal visits happened occasionally. There was no reason to think it concerned her. Then a neighbor ran toward the compound. "Have you heard?" Aunt Ngozi looked up. "Heard what?" "The royal family is here." "So?" The woman lowered her voice. "They're asking questions." A strange feeling settled in Aunt Ngozi's stomach. "What kind of questions?" The neighbor hesitated. Then she spoke. "Questions about Amaka." The broom slipped from Aunt Ngozi's hands. For a moment her face lost all color. Inside the house, Uncle Okeke overheard the conversation. He immediately stepped outside. "What did you say?" The neighbor looked uncomfortable. "The royal family is asking about Amaka." A heavy silence followed. Months ago, they had convinced themselves the matter was over, finished, forgotten. Now suddenly the past had returned. And it had returned wearing a crown. At that exact moment, the royal convoy entered the village square. The vehicles stopped. Guards stepped out first. Then the king. Then the queen. Then Prince Chinedu. Finally, Amaka emerged. The crowd gasped. Several villagers immediately recognized her. Others stared in disbelief. "Amaka? She's back. Look at her." Many could hardly believe what they were seeing. The crippled orphan who had once been thrown out of the village had returned alongside the royal family. And she looked happier than anyone had ever seen her. The whispers spread rapidly. Soon everyone knew. Amaka had returned. And she was standing beside the prince himself. The king addressed the crowd. His voice carried authority, strength, power. "We have come here for one reason." Silence immediately fell across the square. The king continued. "We have learned disturbing information." Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The queen stepped forward. Months of frustration still lingered inside her. "When I invited Amaka to the palace, she never arrived." The crowd exchanged nervous glances. "I sent people to find her." The queen's voice hardened. "And I was lied to." More silence. The villagers already knew where this was heading. Most had witnessed what happened. Most had remained silent. Now the truth was finally catching up with them. The king turned toward a group of guards. "Bring them." The guards immediately obeyed. Minutes later, Aunt Ngozi, Uncle Okeke, and Adiz appeared. The crowd parted to allow them through. For the first time in years, Aunt Ngozi looked frightened. Truly frightened. The king stared at them. "Do you know why you're here?" Nobody answered. "I asked a question." Uncle Okeke swallowed hard. "Yes, your majesty." The king's eyes narrowed. "Then tell me." The man lowered his head. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, the queen spoke. "Did you throw Amaka out of your house?" The question echoed through the square. Hundreds of villagers watched, waiting, listening. Aunt Ngozi looked around desperately. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. The entire village already knew the truth. Eventually, Uncle Okeke nodded. "Yes." Gasps erupted throughout the crowd. Even though many already knew, hearing the admission felt shocking. The queen's expression darkened. "You abandoned a disabled orphan?" Nobody answered. "You abandoned the daughter of people who trusted you?" Still silence. The king stepped forward. "You lied to the palace." His voice thundered across the square. "You lied to your community." The shame on Uncle Okeke's face became obvious. For the first time, he truly understood the magnitude of what he had done. Years of cruelty suddenly stood exposed before everyone. Nothing remained hidden. Nothing remained secret. The villagers began whispering among themselves. Many openly criticized the couple. Others shook their heads in disappointment. An elderly man stepped forward. "We all saw how they treated her." Another villager nodded. "She worked harder than anyone." A woman added, "They treated her like a servant." Soon voices emerged from every direction. One after another, people who had remained silent for years finally spoke. The truth poured out. How Amaka had cooked, cleaned, worked endlessly. How she had been insulted, mocked, humiliated. How she had never complained despite everything. The crowd's mood changed. What began as curiosity became outrage. The community finally confronted a truth they had ignored for far too long. Meanwhile, Adiz stood quietly beside her parents. Tears filled her eyes. For years she had joined in the cruelty. Now she wished she could take it all back. The shame was overwhelming. The queen looked toward Amaka. "My child." Amaka slowly wheeled herself forward. The crowd fell silent again. Every eye focused on her. For years she had been invisible. Today everyone was listening. The queen spoke gently. "Do you wish to say anything?" Amaka looked around. At the villagers. At her aunt. At her uncle. At Adiz. Memories flooded her mind. Painful memories. Lonely memories. Memories of tears and heartbreak. For a long moment nobody spoke. Then Amaka took a deep breath. "When my parents died." Her voice was soft, yet somehow everyone heard it. "I felt alone." The crowd listened carefully. "When I lost the use of my legs, I thought my life was over." Several villagers lowered their eyes. Amaka continued. "But the hardest thing wasn't losing my parents." A tear rolled down her cheek. "It wasn't losing my ability to walk." The square became completely silent. "The hardest thing was believing that nobody wanted me." Many people began crying, including some of the villagers. Amaka looked toward her aunt and uncle. "I spent years trying to earn your love." Aunt Ngozi broke down immediately. Tears streamed down her face. "But nothing I did was enough." The pain in Amaka's voice touched everyone. Because it wasn't anger speaking. It was honesty, pure honesty. Then something unexpected happened. Aunt Ngozi suddenly dropped to her knees. The crowd gasped. "Amaka!" Her voice trembled. The proud, harsh woman who had spent years insulting her now looked completely broken. "I'm sorry." Fresh tears poured down her face. "I'm so sorry." Uncle Okeke slowly knelt beside his wife. His shoulders shook. "We failed you." The words came out barely above a whisper. "We failed your parents." Amaka stared silently. For years she had imagined this moment. Sometimes she imagined screaming. Sometimes she imagined walking away. Sometimes she imagined revenge. Yet standing here now, she felt none of those things. Only sadness and peace. The king watched carefully. The queen watched carefully. Everyone waited. Finally, Amaka spoke. "I forgive you." The words stunned the crowd. Several villagers gasped. Even Chinedu looked surprised. After everything they had done? After years of cruelty? She forgave them? Fresh tears filled Aunt Ngozi's eyes. "You do." Amaka nodded. "I do." The woman began sobbing openly. Not because she deserved forgiveness, because she didn't, but because forgiveness had been offered anyway. The queen quietly wiped her eyes. The king nodded respectfully. Even after everything, Amaka remained exactly who she had always been. Kind, compassionate, strong. The crowd erupted into applause. Some cried. Others smiled. Many shook their heads in amazement. The villagers had expected anger. Instead, they witnessed grace. True grace. As the applause continued, Chinedu stepped forward. Then he did something that shocked the entire village. He took Amaka's hand. Proudly, openly, without hesitation. The message was clear. He loved her. The crowd immediately understood. Whispers spread again. The prince had chosen Amaka, not out of pity, not out of obligation, out of love. The realization filled many villagers with joy. For years they had watched her suffer. Now they were watching her rise, not through revenge, not through bitterness, but through kindness. As the sun began setting over the village, the king addressed the crowd one final time. "There will soon be a royal wedding." The crowd erupted. Cheers echoed across the square. Laughter followed. Excitement spread everywhere. And standing beside the prince, surrounded by people who finally recognized her worth, Amaka felt something she had never truly experienced before. Victory. Not the victory of defeating enemies. Not the victory of proving people wrong. But the victory of surviving hardship without losing herself. And as she looked toward the future, she realized the most beautiful chapter of her life was still waiting to be written. The announcement of Prince Chinedu and Amaka's wedding spread across the kingdom like wildfire. Within days, everyone was talking about it. The newspapers carried the story. Radio stations discussed it. Social media exploded with excitement. People couldn't get enough of the remarkable love story. Poor orphan. A disabled young woman abandoned by her family. A roadside food seller. And now the future wife of a billionaire prince. Many called it a miracle. Others called it destiny. But those who knew Amaka best called it something else. A reward. A reward for years of kindness, patience, and perseverance. Back at the palace, preparations for the wedding were already underway. The royal family wanted the ceremony to be unforgettable. Designers arrived from different parts of the country. Florists transformed the palace grounds. Chefs prepared menus. Musicians were booked. Decorators worked day and night. Every detail received careful attention. Meanwhile, Amaka struggled to believe any of it was real. One morning she stood on her balcony overlooking the palace gardens. The rising sun painted the flowers with shades of gold. Birds flew gracefully through the sky. Everything looked beautiful, peaceful, perfect. Sometimes she wondered if she was dreaming. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. The door opened. Queen Kem entered carrying a tray of breakfast. "My child." Amaka smiled. "Good morning, mother." The word still felt new. Yet every time she said it, the queen's eyes brightened. Queen Kem set the tray down and sat beside her. "Nervous?" Amaka laughed. "A little." "Only a little?" "Maybe more than a little." The queen laughed. "That's normal." For a moment they sat together in comfortable silence. Then the queen took Amaka's hand. "Do you know something?" "What?" "When I first met you, I knew there was something special about you." Amaka smiled shyly. "You only knew me for a few minutes. Sometimes that's enough." The queen squeezed her hand. "You have a beautiful heart." Tears gathered in Amaka's eyes. Even after all these months, she still wasn't used to receiving so much love. For most of her life, love had been something she watched other people receive. Now she was surrounded by it. The days passed quickly. Before long, wedding week arrived. Guests began arriving from across the country. Business leaders, traditional rulers, government officials, celebrities, friends of the royal family. Everyone wanted to witness the historic event. Among the guests was someone very important, Mama Grace. The moment she arrived at the palace, Amaka rushed toward her. The two women embraced tightly. Neither could hold back their tears. "My daughter!" Mama Grace's voice trembled. "Look at you!" Amaka laughed through her tears. "If not for you, none of this would have happened." Mama Grace shook her head immediately. "No," she pointed upward. "This happened because God never forgot you." Those words touched Amaka deeply, because they were true. There had been moments when she felt forgotten. Moments when life seemed unfair. Moments when hope felt impossible. Yet somehow God had been working behind the scenes the entire time. The night before the wedding, Amaka couldn't sleep. She sat near her window watching the moonlight spread across the palace grounds. Memories flooded her mind. Sleeping on a mat in the storage room, being insulted by her aunt, crying herself to sleep, being thrown out of the house, traveling alone, meeting Mama Grace, the food stand, meeting Chinidu. Every memory felt like part of a long journey leading to this moment. A soft knock sounded. The door opened. Chinidu stepped inside. He smiled when he saw her awake. "I knew you'd still be awake." Amaka laughed. "You're not supposed to see the bride before the wedding." "I'll risk it." She shook her head. "Terrible prince." "That's me." For a while they simply sat together. Neither spoke much. Words weren't necessary. Eventually Chinidu took her hand. "Are you happy?" The question surprised her. She thought carefully before answering. Then tears filled her eyes. "More than happy." He smiled. "Good." Amaka looked at him. "What about you?" His answer came instantly. "I've never been happier." The sincerity in his voice made her smile. For years both of them had been searching for something. For Chinidu it was purpose. For Amaka it was belonging. Now they had found both. Together. The next morning arrived at last. Wedding day. The palace transformed into something magical. Thousands of flowers decorated the grounds. Elegant white tents stretched across the gardens. Musicians performed beautiful melodies. Guests filled every available seat. Excitement buzzed through the air. Inside her room, Amaka prepared for the ceremony. Several attendants helped with her dress. When she finally saw herself in the mirror, she gasped. The gown was breathtaking, elegant, beautiful, perfect. For a moment she barely recognized herself. The young woman staring back seemed so different from the frightened orphan she once was. Yet deep down she remained the same person. The same kind-hearted girl who never stopped believing. A tear rolled down her cheek. One of the attendants smiled. "Don't cry." Amaka laughed. "I'm trying." Meanwhile, outside, Chinidu waited nervously. The prince who could confidently negotiate billionaire business deals suddenly couldn't sit still. The king noticed immediately. "You look terrified." "I'm not terrified." The king laughed. "You look terrified." The queen joined them. "Leave him alone." The king grinned. "I remember my wedding day." The queen smiled. "You looked exactly the same." Soon the ceremony began. The music softened. Guests rose to their feet. Then everyone turned toward the entrance. Amaka appeared. A collective gasp swept through the crowd. She looked radiant, beautiful, elegant. For several seconds, Chinidu simply stared. The world around him seemed to disappear. The guests, the decorations, the music, everything faded. All he could see was her, the woman who had changed his life, the woman he loved, the woman who was about to become his wife. As she moved toward him, tears filled his eyes. Amaka noticed immediately. She laughed softly. "You're crying." "So are you." She touched her face. He was right. The ceremony itself was beautiful. Vows were exchanged. Promises were made. Blessings were given. When the officiant finally declared them husband and wife, applause erupted throughout the palace grounds. Cheers filled the air. Music began playing. Guests celebrated enthusiastically. The king and queen hugged them both. Mama Grace cried openly. Even many of the palace staff wiped away tears. It was impossible not to be moved by the story. Later that evening, during the grand reception, another surprise awaited. The king stood and addressed the guests. His voice carried proudly across the hall. "Today we celebrate more than a marriage." The room fell silent. "We celebrate character." The king looked toward Amaka. "We celebrate courage." His eyes softened. "And we celebrate kindness." Many guests nodded. The king continued. "Amaka could have allowed hardship to make her bitter." Silence filled the room. "She could have chosen anger." The king smiled. "Instead, she chose grace." The applause that followed seemed endless. Amaka fought back tears, not because of the praise, but because of how far she had come. Months later, life settled into a beautiful routine. Amaka adapted to palace life surprisingly well. She remained humble, kind, approachable. The people adored her. Soon she launched programs to help disabled children and vulnerable orphans throughout the kingdom. She understood their struggles because she had lived them herself. Thousands of lives began changing because of her efforts. The people didn't just respect her. They loved her. One evening, nearly a year after the wedding, Amaka sat beside Chinedu on a palace balcony. The sunset painted the sky with brilliant colors. Below them, children laughed in the gardens. The palace glowed warmly in the fading light. Chinedu slipped an arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" Amaka smiled. "My parents." He squeezed her hand. "They would be proud." She nodded. "I hope so." They would. For a moment they watched the sunset together. Then Amaka laughed softly. "What?" She shook her head. "I'm remembering that storage room." Chinedu smiled. "The one your aunt made you sleep in?" "Yes." She looked toward the horizon. "If someone had told me then that this would be my life, I wouldn't have believed them." Chinedu kissed her forehead. "Life is funny like that." "It is." As darkness slowly settled over the kingdom, Amaka looked around at everything she had gained. Family, a home, purpose, a husband who loved her completely. She finally understood something important. Her greatest blessing wasn't becoming a princess. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't the palace. It wasn't even the royal title. Her greatest blessing was discovering that her worth had never depended on her circumstances. She had always been valuable, always been worthy of love, always been enough. And now, surrounded by the people she loved most, Amaka finally had everything she had once prayed for beneath that lonely tree on the side of the road. Hope had led her forward. Kindness had carried her through. Love had found her. And from that day onward, Princess Amaka and Prince Chinedu lived a life filled with joy, purpose, laughter, and love. A love story that the kingdom would remember for generations. And whenever people asked Princess Amaka how she went from being a poor orphan in a wheelchair to a beloved princess, she always gave the same answer. Never lose hope. God can change your story when you least expect it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to this channel and tell us where you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.